Well, chapter 9 brings us back to Saul. We left him at the beginning of chapter 8, where he's persecuting and imprisoning men and women alike. And now we come back to him after hearing a little parenthesis regarding the work in Samaria with Philip and then down in Gaza. And again, I think that part of the purpose of chapter 9, or chapter 8 rather, with Philip is to introduce us to the idea of expansion of the gospel beyond Judea. But Paul is still at work, and Luke kind of catches up to where he left off with Saul at the beginning of chapter 8. He's still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord. Now he goes to the high priest, and this is an interesting text. He goes to the high priest and requests letters from him to the synagogues of Damascus, so that if he found anyone there who was of the way, whether men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. Let's talk about this background a little bit here. First of all, we need to understand the relationship of the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem to the rest of Judaism in the empire. Remember that the Romans permitted the Sanhedrin to continue to exist, to oversee the laws pertaining to their own people. And the jurisdiction of the Sanhedrin went beyond Jerusalem and Judea and even Israel. It pertained to those practicing Judaism in other countries. There were synagogues all over the Roman Empire, but those synagogues functioned under the ultimate jurisdiction of the Jerusalem Sanhedrin. Now, you do need to understand that there were other Sanhedrins that also functioned in other places in the empire. They were smaller. They were normally composed of about 23, in contrast with the 70 who were part of the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem. You could kind of think of a Supreme Court in comparison to lower regional district courts. That's kind of the same concept. But ultimately, the Supreme Court, the Supreme Sanhedrin in Jerusalem, would make the final shots. Now, Paul is heading to Damascus. Damascus is in Syria. It's not in Israel. And therefore, in order for Paul to be able to enter a synagogue in Syria to interfere with Jewish affairs in another country, he needs permission from the Jerusalem Sanhedrin. That's the purpose of requesting letters from the high priest. Those letters can be presented to synagogue leaders, to Jewish leaders in this case, Syria, and give him the authority, the extended authority of the Jerusalem Sanhedrin to act on their behalf. Now, some would say that this is another indication that Paul had been a member of the Sanhedrin. Otherwise, why would he have this kind of contact with the high priest? Well, I don't know the answer to that. I don't think that we can simply assume that because he made petition to the high priest that rendered him a member of the Sanhedrin. But he did have connections at the very least. And so he gets this authorization. Now, why is he going to Damascus? Well, we're going to find out later when he gives his testimony near the end of the book that he actually was going to many different places, not just Damascus, but he had been traveling apparently in other places around the Roman Empire. How extensively, we just don't know. But why Damascus? Well, Damascus was kind of, at least in the eyes of the Jewish people, the Jewish leaders, true followers of Judaism, Damascus was kind of a rogue city. It was kind of a harbor for a lot of people who had strange religious ideas and maybe didn't have the freedom to exercise their religious ideas in their homelands. And so Damascus kind of became a place where you could bring a strange or different idea and present it there and try to grow it there. And it is also possible because of that Saul may have believed that with the persecution of the church and the scattering of believers out of Jerusalem, that maybe Damascus would be a really good place for them to settle in, since Damascus welcomed people with different views, maybe the church leaders would head to Damascus in order to nurture and cultivate this new religion there. Again, I'm only speculating based on some historical evidence regarding Damascus. Whatever the case, at this point, that's where he's heading. And notice that he refers to Christians or followers of Jesus as those who are of the way. The way is a designation found 5 times in the book of Acts referring to the church, and probably based on the words of Jesus, who said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. That probably was one of the early sayings of Jesus that really took hold even before the written scriptures of the New Testament were completed. So, whatever the case, he's heading toward Damascus. And here are the other references to the way. Actually, I said 5 beyond the text here in Acts chapter 9. So there are actually 6 if you include that one. Okay, here's Damascus. Let me blow that up for you. Damascus in Syria. Now, the little dotted lines represent major highways that existed at that time. If you look at the Sea of Galilee at the bottom of the page there on the left, you see a road going up to Caesarea Philippi. That's where Peter made his great confession, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus there proclaimed that he would build his church and the gates of hell would not prevail against it. But if you go on farther to the southeast of Mount Tabor, you eventually can make your way to Damascus. So that gives you the historical context of what's happening here. Okay, well, back to your maps here. I'm going to blow it up again for you here. Let's add Damascus, and you can see it there on the right side. And that's, of course, a guesstimate because the map is pretty broad here, but gives you a good idea as to where it's located. Damascus. So take whatever time you need to get that. If you need to pause this to get your map out and put that on there, then feel free to do so. All right. So Paul is on his way, and you all know this story very well. He's drawing near Damascus, and it's about noon. And the reason we know that is because of the corresponding record in chapter 22, verse 6, when Paul gives his testimony on the stairs of the Fortress Antonia in Jerusalem. And a bright light shined from heaven. Obviously, this is not the sun. This is something much brighter than the sun, more powerful than the sun. And he falls to the ground and he hears a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Now, just keep in mind that there are actually 3 accounts of Saul's conversion in the book of Acts. This is the actual account of the event chronologically when it happened. In chapter 22, as I said, is another accounting of that as he gives his testimony. And then in chapter 26, he'll have yet another opportunity to share his story before King Herod Agrippa II when he is on trial. So 3 accounts, which really highlights the importance of this pivotal event in the early church. He was the one who was spearheading the persecution, and he will eventually become the one who spearheads the spread of the gospel to the Western world. And so, he responds, who are you, Lord? That's kurios. That can mean sir. It doesn't necessarily mean that he is recognizing Jesus as Lord, although I think he is, given the context of what's happening. Jesus says, I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. It's hard for you to kick against the goads. And of course, goads were instruments that were used to keep oxen from kicking back against the one who was driving them when plowing a field. And, almost ironically, Jesus is saying to Saul, oxen learn faster than you. You just keep on kicking and kicking and kicking against the goads. He was very stubborn. Paul was very determined and very, very difficult to change his mind. But of course, Jesus got it done. And again, I do believe that Stephen's testimony and the larger testimony of the early church did play a role in God's working in his heart. So here he's ripe fruit by this point. He's astonished. He's trembling. He submits himself to the Lord. What do you want me to do? And the Lord says, arise and go into the city, Damascus, and I'll have somebody there to tell you what to do. I think it's fascinating that Jesus doesn't tell him right there exactly what he's going to do. Now, there is more that Jesus does say to him here that we'll see when we get to chapters 22 and 26. But Jesus has prepared a man in the city of Damascus who will give him further instructions. And the fact that there is someone in Damascus who will do that is evidence that there was already a contingency of believers, a group of disciples who had formed in the city of Damascus. Just out of curiosity, here are the other references in Acts to the phrase arise and go. We saw that relative to Philip, and here are the other ones. Again, you don't need to know all of those. I just want you to kind of have a look at them here. So there are others with him, obviously. I mean, how's he going to bring back people as prisoners if he doesn't have some soldiers and means of transportation to get them all back? And so there are others journeying with him, and they're standing, they're speechless. They're hearing a voice, but they're not seeing anyone. So exactly what is it that they are hearing? Well, chapter 22, he actually says to the mob in Jerusalem, they did not hear the voice of him who spoke. There's really no contradiction here. They heard some sort of a rumbling, but it was an indiscernible sound. And I think that's the only logical conclusion to a comparison of these two verses. They heard something, maybe a thundering of some sort, but nothing that was discernible. Only Paul could understand what Jesus was saying. So he arises from the ground. He's blinded, as we know, temporarily, and they lead him by the hand into Jerusalem. Here's the guy who has been threatening and scaring believers and hoarding them as prisoners and sometimes even killing them. And now someone actually has to take this man by the hand to lead him into Damascus. You know, it's just what a transformation. And again, I don't think that this happens all at once on the road to Damascus. I think that God has been working on him through Stephen's testimony and others, and little by little been bringing him to this point where he finally falls as ripe fruit into the hand of his new Lord. And he was in Jerusalem for 3 days, in Damascus for 3 days without sight, and he neither ate nor drank. He is so overwhelmed by what has just happened that he can do nothing but pray and meditate. And we will see in a moment that the first activity that is recorded of the new Paul as a follower of Jesus is prayer. Now, here is the individual whom Jesus has prepared to give Paul further instructions. He's called a disciple, and his name is Ananias. Most likely he was a leader among those who were believers in Damascus. We have no idea how big the church was there, but this man certainly would have been a leader among those believers. And God appears to him, and God gives him instructions. Go to Straight Street and inquire at the house of Judas for one called Saul of Tarsus, for behold, he is praying. And there it is. The first recorded activity of Saul the believer is prayer, and that never ceases to be a priority, an ongoing activity in his life. And just wonder, remember the first activity of the early believers of the 120 in the upper room, even before the church started, was continuing in prayer. And then the four things that the church was characterized for doing at the beginning of the age was the apostles' doctrine, fellowship, breaking of bread, and prayers. So very, very important. And so while Annas is having a vision, Paul is having a corresponding vision in verse 12. He has seen Ananias coming and putting his hand on him so that he might receive his sight. So you have dual visions going on here. In verse 10, the Lord speaks to Ananias in a vision, and Saul is also having a vision. Now, this is Straight Street, and the name is not creative. It's called Straight Street because it is straight. Now, today, it's not a functioning street with cars and bicycles and all that. It's a tourist trap. It has become a row of shops, but it's still there, and you can visit. I have never been there, Someday I'd love to go to that part of the world and do some touring, but that's Straight Street as it looks today. And also, there is a little chapel there today that is probably an Eastern Orthodox chapel. I'll blow this up a little bit. If you look carefully on the wall, you'll see a carving that depicts the visit of Ananias to Saul of Tarsus and laying his hands on him so that he might receive his sight. So the Eastern Orthodox Church there, continues to make a big deal of that to this day. All right, when we come back next time, we'll see what happens as Saul begins his new life as a follower of Jesus Christ.